Hey everyone, and welcome to a brand new video. Tonight we have 2 hours of horror stories. If you enjoy them, please be sure to drop a like rating. Let's see if we can reach 1200 likes on this one. Of course, only if you feel this video is deserving of it. Subscribing if you are new is also very much appreciated, as I post content just like this all of the time. Sit back, relax, enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. The photograph depicted 6 people joyfully smiling at the camera and posing in front of a beautifully decorated Christmas tree. 4 of them were adults, my uncle, aunt, mother, and father, and the other 2 were a 10-year-old girl and a 1-year-old baby, the young girl lovingly cradled in her arms. Ever since your mother got pregnant, Kylie wouldn't stop rambling about how impatient she was for you to be born, and when that finally happened, she then wanted you to grow up so quickly so you could both play together. My aunt explained as I stared at the picture. I had no memories of Kylie, so seeing a picture of myself right alongside her as a baby was fascinating and emotional in a way I can't really put into words. It made me wonder what could have been had it not for the sudden tragedy that would befall upon my cousin and would devastate the whole family shortly after. Just a week after that cheerful Christmas day of 2005, Kylie would mysteriously go missing one dark and cold January night of 2006. Never to be seen or heard from again. As for me, I'd since grown into an 18-year-old college student. I had come to stay at my aunt's house for a while because it was conveniently located near the college I studied at. After having lunch and chatting with my aunt and uncle, they took me upstairs to show me the room I'd be sleeping in. I recognized that locked door at first sight. Kylie's room. It had remained locked ever since Kylie disappeared, and all my attempts to enter it when I was a kid had resulted in me getting scolded by my mother and aunt. "Are you sure you can take it? I can sleep on the couch downstairs. You don't have to do this," I asked my aunt and uncle, knowing what that room meant for them, and knowing how they promised themselves to permanently keep that room shut ever since the day they lost Kylie. "We've given it a lot of thought. Don't worry about us, Jane. Kylie loved you. It's what she would have wanted," they replied as they slowly opened the door to Kylie's room. My aunt and uncle had cleaned it up a bit the day before my arrival, but for the most part, it looked pretty much identical to how it did the day Kylie vanished. The pink, flowery wallpaper that decorated the wall, the shelf filled with toys and children's books. The bed and even the bed sheets were also the same. It almost felt as if Kylie herself had just been there earlier that day, as if time had stopped flowing after she went missing. "This room is yours now. Make yourself at home and feel free to call us if you need anything," my aunt and uncle proclaimed before leaving me alone in the room. I spent the remainder of that evening reading a book I had to write an essay about for college. After a couple of hours, I decided I had read enough for that day and opened a drawer next to the bed in order to store the book, only to find that there already was a book inside that drawer, a very special kind of book. It was considerably smaller than my book from college. Its cover was pink with the title being written in big purple letters that spelled, "My Diary." It didn't take a genius to figure out what this book was, and who it most likely used to belong to. I did not hesitate to pick it up, and began reading the first page. I was tired of reading the book from college, but how could I say no to the diary of my long-lost cousin? December 25th, 2005. Dear Diary, it's Christmas Day. I've received tons of presents this morning. I knew Santa Claus was proud of me. I've gotten the new Animal Crossing game for my DS, a pair of woolly earmuffs, and this diary. I wanted a doll like the one all the other girls in my class have. There's even a boy who has the doll too, but he told me to keep it a secret. Mommy says I have to be thankful for what I've gotten, and I guess she's right, so not having the doll doesn't bother me that much. Also, my aunt and uncle and baby Jane have visited us, and we've all had lunch together. Baby Jane is the cutest. I promised my aunt I would take care of her just like Mommy took care of me when I was a baby. Reading that first entry made me shed a few tears. I couldn't help it. I could picture the innocent smile on her face as she wrote on her brand new diary that Christmas day. And the way she talked about me as a baby was so heartwarming, it almost made me feel enraged about the fact I knew I had spent time with her, but was far too young to remember any of it. December 26th, 2005. Dear Diary, what a day. Mommy and Daddy have taken me to a snowy mountain. There were other kids with their parents, and we've played together in the snow. It was so much fun. We made a snowman, and I wanted to give him my earmuffs, but Mommy said I needed them for myself, so my ears can stay warm and cozy. I saw another girl with earmuffs, and hers were much cuter. They were pink and were shaped like hearts. Mine are just round and red. Anyway, the best part of the day was when I found a doll lost in the snow. She looks like an angel. She's not like the doll my friends have, but she's cute, so I've taken her home. And guess what? I've named her Jane, like the baby. That entry made me notice something I had first seen when I entered the room, but I hadn't really paid attention to it until Kylie's diary brought it up. The plush doll that was sitting on Kylie's bed, which was now my bed, I guess. It looked like a traditional angel with a pair of wings, white robes, and a small halo on its head. I had no doubt about it. This doll had to be the same one mentioned in the diary, which Kylie had named after myself. Kylie wrote that she had found the doll lost on a snowy mountain in late 2005, but it looked to be much older than that. It would have felt right at home in an antique store filled with memorabilia from the Victorian era. Who knows where it had come from and what it had been through before being found by Kylie. I figured that continuing to read the diary would perhaps give me more information about that mysterious doll I shared my name with. December 27th, 2005. Dear Diary, Jane cried last night. She was sleeping by my side and she started crying, like a real kid. This morning, I've told Mommy and Daddy, but they believe I'm just playing pretend. But I'm not. I woke up and she wasn't in bed with me. Maybe she didn't want me to pick her up. I tried to cheer her up by bringing her to my friend Sarah's house. We played with our dolls and made a make-believe tea party. Sarah said Jane wasn't as cute as her doll. She said Jane was kinda creepy. I got upset because that made Jane feel sad, so she might cry tonight as well. Thanks a lot, Sarah. That last entry left me utterly baffled. A plethora of conflicting thoughts flooded my mind as I stared at that doll in the bed. No, it simply couldn't be possible. It didn't make rational sense for Kylie's diary entry to be taken literally. Surely it was nothing more than a child with a wild imagination. But still, the sudden tone shift compared to the previous two entries was striking. I had originally planned to sleep with the Jane doll next to me out of respect for Kylie, but after reading her diary, I instead opted to leave it on the shelf with the other toys. It just gave me some bad vibes I didn't quite know how to explain. But I knew there was something about her that felt off, and the fact it was named Jane just like me didn't help either. I woke up in the middle of the night as an odd, high-pitched sound broke the silence. I drowsily looked around the bedroom in pitch darkness in hopes of identifying where the sound had come from, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. I wiggled in bed for a couple seconds, trying to get in a comfortable position to get back to sleep. It was then when I felt something small and soft touching my arm. The Jane doll. There it was, laying next to me. I vaguely remembered having put her on the shelf before going to sleep, but it was late and I was pretty tired. So my sleepy brain assumed that I had just imagined leaving her on the shelf and had kept her in bed this whole time. A short while afterwards, I was woken up by a sudden noise once again. It sounded like a child was crying. I stood up only to see what looked like a small, shadowy figure in the darkness, standing right next to the bed. I also noticed the Jane doll was gone. It wasn't on the bed and it wasn't on the shelf either. I rubbed my eyes, thinking this was just what they call a sleep paralysis demon. You know, an imaginary shadow creature our mind sometimes conjures when you wake up abruptly, and your senses are alert but your mind is still half asleep, and misinterprets reality. But those kinds of illusions are normally static and lifeless, and only last a couple seconds. No, that shadowy child was something else. I was sure I could hear them weep. I tried to turn on the lights, but they had inexplicably stopped working. The shadowy child lingered in the darkness, sobbing right next to the bed with their hands covering their face. I sat on my bed, contemplating them in silence. My brain was still too sleepy and confused to move or react in any other way. Kylie? I faintly uttered the first thing that came to my mind as I slowly tried to process what was going on. Upon hearing my words, the child stopped weeping and put down their hands, which had been covering her face. The baby. The baby. Where is the baby? The child yelled in a voice that resembled that of a little girl as they lunged themselves towards me. I finally snapped out of my drowsy state as my survival instincts kicked in. I struggled as the child aggressively tried to grab my hair and tried to hold her arms. The baby. The baby. The child kept uttering. I gathered all the strength I could muster and pushed her out of the bed, causing her to tumble to the floor as I screamed in panic. My aunt and uncle came running in my room and I hopped out of bed. "Jane, what's the matter?" they asked worryingly. The doll disappeared, and then there was a kid, and they attacked me." I shouted in tears as I was trying to make sense of what had just happened. My uncle turned on the lights and it worked, unlike what had happened when I had tried it earlier. "What doll? The one that's over there on the bed? It used to belong to Kylie. You must have had a nightmare. We understand better than anyone it must be emotionally intense for you to sleep in this room, but there's nothing to worry about." My aunt comforted me as I stared in disbelief at the doll, which had somehow reappeared on the bed. The shadowy kid had vanished without a trace. There were only 45 minutes left until 7 a.m., which was the time I usually woke up at, so I decided not to go back to bed and to have breakfast early. My uncle accompanied me to the kitchen with his characteristic limp as my aunt stayed behind. "Calm down, my dear. Calm down," I heard my aunt murmur. I initially thought she was talking to me, until I noticed her eyes weren't directed towards me, but she instead was looking back at Kylie's room. I brought Kylie's diary with me to college. The last lecture of the day was considered the most boring one by practically the entire class, so plenty of students spent the hour distracting themselves with their computers, playing video games or checking social media. I opted to spend it reading a few entries of Kylie's diary, desperate to find out more details about my cousin's fate, especially after the terrifying events I had experienced the previous night. December 28th, 2005. Dear Diary, I can't believe it. It's happening for real. First of all, I've lost my second milk tooth this morning while I was eating cereal for breakfast. I've put it under my pillow so the tooth fairy can come to pick it up, but I'm also excited for another thing. My aunt and uncle have gone on a trip to another country together, and have left baby Jane with us in our house for a few days. Hooray! I convinced my mommy and daddy to let the baby sleep in my room with me. I'll ask the tooth fairy to bring me something I can give to baby Jane. Also, Jane the doll cried again when mommy and daddy brought baby Jane to my room in her crib. I think she wants me to put her right next to baby Jane, so I'll do that tonight, and the two Janes can sleep together. Isn't that cute? December 29th, 2005. Dear Diary, I don't understand what happened last night. Baby Jane wouldn't stop crying. Jane the doll was grabbing the baby's face, and baby Jane started moving her adorable tiny hands and feet because she wanted the doll away from her. I grabbed the doll and told her, "Bad, Jane, bad. Hurting babies is what naughty people do." Mommy and Daddy came running to my room to see why baby Jane was crying, and they brought her to their room to sleep with them. Maybe Jane the doll doesn't like baby Jane because they have the same name. I knew I should have named her Annabelle or something like that. My face went pale as I finished reading those two entries. For years, I had believed that Christmas Day of 2005 was the last time Kylie and I had ever spent time together. But apparently I was wrong. I had spent my whole childhood and adolescence asking my family about Kylie, and not even once did they mention that I had spent several days alongside her after Christmas Day, right before her disappearance. It was a hard pill to swallow, but the diary confirmed that my family clearly knew more than they were letting out. But to what extent? Thinking about it sent shivers down my spine, but I had to accept it was a factor I needed to take into consideration if I really wanted to get to the bottom of this. "Hey, are you okay? You look concerned," asked Cindy, a classmate of mine who sat right next to me upon seeing my reaction to Kylie's diary. "It's nothing. I'm just reading a thriller novel with lots of suspense," I replied discreetly, putting the diary away so she wouldn't be able to see what I was truly reading. Cindy was really into creepy disappearances and paranormal experiences. One day she told me a really weird story about a paranormal phenomena occurring at a daycare, but I didn't really pay attention to her. I contemplated asking her for help in solving the case of my missing cousin and the doll, but I ultimately opted to keep investigating on my own. I didn't want to make this rabbit hole bigger than it already was by bringing in people who had nothing to do with it. I arrived at my uncle's house after college and found myself alone for a while. Since my aunt and uncle had gone to hang out with several other families they had met at their collective therapy sessions for families who had lost their children, they were especially close with the parents of a little boy named Hugh, as well as the parents of a teenage girl named Molly, both of whom had gone missing a few years earlier than Kylie in some incident I don't know much about. My aunt and uncle had left lunch prepared for me, so I ate on my own and thought about what I would do later that night. Since I didn't want to sleep with that Jane doll again, I figured reading more of Kylie's diary would give me a solution. December 30th, 2005. Dear Diary, Jane the doll is behaving very badly since baby Jane came to our house. I told my mommy and daddy about it, but they still don't believe that a doll is able to do all these things. Baby Jane sleeps in their room now, but Jane the doll is still causing trouble. Baby Jane and I were having a nap after lunch, but I was in my bedroom and she was in Mommy and Daddy's bedroom while they were in the living room. Jane the doll was in my room at first, but then I fell asleep for a little while and she wasn't there when I woke up. I ran to my Mommy and Daddy's room and Jane the doll was in Baby Jane's crib, and her hands were covering Baby Jane's mouth so she couldn't cry. I grabbed Jane the doll and tossed her to the floor. Tonight, I'll bring Baby Jane to my room and leave Jane the doll with my parents while they're asleep. They'll get mad at me, but I don't care. I must protect Baby Jane. I was astonished. The experience with the Jane doll I had the previous night made it clear to me it was best to stay away from it, but I never could have imagined it had been after me since I was a literal baby. And Kylie caught on eventually and did her best to keep me safe. I had no doubt that a cursed doll was responsible for whatever had happened to her. It was then when I noticed there was only one last entry of the diary left to read. I eagerly turned the page in order to find out what secrets could Kylie's last testimony hold. January 26th, 2006. Dear Diary, the baby, where is the baby? Did Jane take the baby? Did Jane take Kylie? The baby is not with me. The baby, protect the baby. Kylie must protect the baby. Kylie is here. Jane is here. But where is the baby? Kylie will always protect the baby. Always. If the previous entries had impressed me, this last one simply left me speechless to a point I cannot describe with words. The things Kylie had written up to that point had described outlandish situations, sure, but the events they narrated at least maintained a certain degree of cohesion and structure. In contrast, this last entry didn't really narrate any events at all, and instead seemed like the ramblings of someone who had gone mad, and was in the middle of having a mental breakdown. It was hard to believe a little girl who had once been so innocent and cheerful could have written something like this. But its disturbing content wasn't the only thing that felt off about this last entry. The date. It was supposedly written in January 2nd of 2006, but the previous entry was dated December 30th of 2005. What happened between those two dates? It was apparent a couple of pages had been removed, but by who? Just when I was starting to theorize about the mysterious last diary entry and the pair of missing entries, my aunt and uncle arrived home. For that night, I decided to follow Kylie's plan and get the Jane doll away from my room by putting her in the attic. I also locked my bedroom's door for good measure. I was woken up in the middle of the night once again, only this time it wasn't because of something coming from inside the bedroom, but from the outside. I could have sworn I had heard the attic's door opening at the other side of the hallway. Tap, 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 tap. Footsteps. Someone was coming to my bedroom. It didn't take long before they knocked on the door. Who's there? I uttered but received no response. They kept knocking, again and again, growing more and more impatient until what had started as normal knocking turned into aggressive banging. I lay on my bed, horrified as the entity at the other side of the door began to whisper some familiar words. The baby. A little girl's voice repeatedly uttered. I had no doubt it was the same shadowy child from the previous night. Tap, 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 tap. All of a sudden, the sound of footsteps echoed across the hallway once again. Someone else was heading to the bedroom. I felt shivers down my spine as the sound of rattling keys was followed by the slow and eerie creaking of my bedroom's door. Whoever was there, It was evident that second individual had come to open the door for the shadowy child. For Kylie. I frantically hid under the bed as the door opened and the outline of the two individuals became barely visible in the dark hallway. Right in front of the bedroom, Kylie stepped inside the bedroom as the other individual, who was much taller, began to walk away with a very familiar limp. "You won't take her away," Kylie murmured as she aimlessly roamed around the bedroom. I had tried to talk to her last time, and that had only resulted in her attacking me, so I opted to keep silent under the bed. After several minutes of roaming the bedroom filled with confusion and anger, Kylie crouched and crawled under the bed. My heart was racing as I thought she had found my hiding spot and was coming for me, but to my surprise, she curled into a ball and began weeping, seemingly unaware of my presence just a few inches away. I held my breath as well as the tears that were flowing from my eyes, trying not to make a sound as I slowly wiggled away from Kylie, who was still quietly sobbing in a corner. Slowly but surely I began emerging from under the bed. The upper half of my body had made it out, but I was still struggling with my legs and feet. Bump. My face went pale as I felt my right foot hitting on the bed legs. Kylie yelled as she reached out with her arms to try and drag me back under the bed. She tried to get a hold of my feet, but by that point, I had stopped trying to be stealthy. I stood up and quickly sprinted out of the bedroom as I could see Kylie's blurry silhouette crawling from under the bed. "Jane, what's wrong? Why aren't you in your room?" My aunt and uncle exclaimed in confusion as I ran to their bedroom. "You know what's going on," I replied in a combination of anger and fear. "What are you talking about? Shouldn't you be asleep? You have to get up early to go to college tomorrow," they said, continuing to act clueless. "I'm talking about Kylie. I can hardly believe it myself, but Kylie's still in there. And that creepy doll of hers has something to do with it." "Oh, Jane, we get that Kylie's disappearance has affected you ever since you were a child. We're the first ones who wish we could see her again. We also sometimes imagine that she's still with us, but we have to face the truth and press on. We can't let our lives be consumed by grief. You're tired. You should really go back to sleep. We can talk about this tomorrow if you need to, okay?" My aunt uttered in a soft, motherly voice as she hugged me. Seeing how trying to talk to them was futile, I ended up doing what they told me and going back to sleep, but not to Kylie's bedroom. I spent the remainder of that night sleeping on the couch downstairs. My aunt and uncle and I ate breakfast, gathered around the table in the kitchen, with all three of us eating in silence. Even if you had been a stranger randomly stumbling into the kitchen without the slightest idea of who we were and what was going on, you would have still been able to sense the palpable tension between us pretty clearly. As I finished eating my toast, I took a deep breath before finally deciding to break the ice. "We need to talk. We need to talk about Kylie," I uttered. We returned to staring at each other silently for a couple seconds before my aunt responded. "Sure, honey. If only Kylie could see you all grown up," she said as she shed a few tears. "We can talk about what happened if that's what you want, even though I'm not sure what we can tell you that you don't already know," my uncle added. "Then why didn't you tell me about the fact I was there?" I stoutly asked. Once again, they stayed silent. Judging by their stare, it was clear they were not expecting that question. "I was there the week Kylie vanished. My parents were on a trip and I stayed at your house as a baby, alongside Kylie. I know this because I found her old diary in her room. I've read it all except for a few pages that are missing. Why did no one in my family ever tell me about this? I continued my interrogation, raising my voice to make it clear I was not joking around. You were just a baby. We thought that learning about it would be too traumatic for you, and since you had no memory of it anyway, we figured it would be best to omit that detail. My uncle answered once they realized I was going to stop at nothing to find out the truth. But I'm not a baby anymore. I have the right to find out what truly happened. Oh, and that fact you call a detail is much more than that. Kylie wrote about the time she spent with me. She wrote about that doll that she named after myself. I don't know how or why, but that thing wants something from me. It has wanted something from me ever since I was a baby, and Kylie knew and tried to protect me. Hold on, Jane, you're taking this too far. Are you suggesting that a simple doll is responsible for my daughter's disappearance? My aunt asked. I'm not suggesting it. I'm sure of it. And Kylie, she might not be the same, but she's not entirely gone. That doll has gotten a hold of her. I've seen her. I've seen firsthand what happens in her room every night, I exclaimed. Oh, look at the time. You'd better get going or else you'll be late to college, my uncle said as he forcefully put an end to the conversation. Wait, you can't keep the truth away from me, I protested, but it was no use. My aunt and uncle refused to keep talking and practically dragged me outside of the house. I skipped the last 2 lectures of college and returned to my uncle's home earlier than usual. As I expected, my aunt and uncle hadn't arrived home yet. Great, that gave me some time to continue investigating without being disturbed. It had become evident that my aunt and uncle weren't too fond of me looking into Kylie's disappearance and finding out about things that were never intended for me to know about. That accursed Jane doll was the one behind everything. I had no doubt about it. No matter how much my aunt and uncle tried to deny it, I'm going to be honest. After what happened on my first night spent sleeping in Kylie's room, I originally thought that the Jane doll was haunted by Kylie. But while that assumption turned to be partially correct, I was now sure it wasn't the whole picture. Yes, it had become apparent that Kylie's spirit had somehow become attached to that doll. But Kylie herself wasn't the one in control. The doll was the one pulling the strings, holding Kylie against her will. Indeed, Kylie's diary confirmed that the doll was already alive before Kylie disappeared, or rather, before the doll took her over. If I wanted all of this to end, I had to destroy that doll. I climbed the staircase and confidently marched towards Kylie's bedroom, ready to grab that Jane doll, bring her to the fireplace in the living room, and let her be consumed by the flames. But as I stepped foot inside the room, I realized that the doll was not there, and not only that, but there were no signs of Kylie's diary either. After scouring Kylie's room in search of the doll and the diary without success, I headed across the hallway to the first place that came to my mind. My uncle and aunt's bedroom. There was nothing of importance under the bed, or at their nightstand, or inside their multiple drawers and closets, but I knew they had to be somewhere in that room. Where else could they possibly be? Who else could have been interested in hiding the doll and the diary away from me, especially after I had explicitly told them I had an interest in those artifacts earlier that morning? I swung open a large wardrobe. At first glance, it seemed to serve no other purpose than to store my aunt's extensive collection of fur coats and scarves. But upon closer inspection, it became clear that there was something else. A small object discreetly tucked at the bottom of the wardrobe, hidden behind the dense row of bulky clothes. I stretched my arms and pulled the mysterious object out of the wardrobe, revealing a dusty wooden box. I opened it without hesitation, smiling of satisfaction as I glanced at its contents. The Jane doll, Kylie's diary, and something else. A pair of pages with something written on them which looked all too familiar. December 31st, 2005. Dear Diary, I've done it. It's the last day of the year, and me and baby Jane will be spending it together. I don't care about what mommy and daddy say. I've locked myself in my room with baby Jane right after having dinner. But we're not going to sleep. She's supposed to be at mommy and daddy's room, but I've swapped her for Jane the doll so I can protect her. Baby Jane makes it hard to focus on writing this because she's sitting on my lap right now being the cutest thing I've ever seen. Aw, she just smiled at me. Focus, Kylie. So anyways, Jane the doll is at mommy and daddy's room, but I know she'll try to come for us tonight. That's why I've locked the door. I will not let her harm baby Jane, no matter what. January 1st, 2006. Dear Diary, it's early in the morning. Baby Jane and I are doing our best to hold out. Jane the doll has been trying to get in for hours. All I can hear is banging and more banging. It's so loud it makes poor baby Jane cry, but mommy and daddy are still sleeping in their room. Don't be afraid, baby Jane. If that doll wants to get you, she'll have to go through the door first, and if she manages to do that, she'll have to go through me. Wait, the banging has stopped. I can hear Jane the doll going away. Yes, she's going back to mommy and daddy's room. Oh wait, I forgot there were more keys in mommy and daddy's room. Before I had enough time to process those 2 diary entries, I was shaken by the sound of footsteps. It sounded like someone was climbing the stairs. I tried to put everything inside the box and hide it away at the last second, but I was too late. My aunt and uncle walked into the room, catching me off guard. We expected you'd find this eventually. I guess there's no need to keep pretending at this point. It's best for us to tell you everything so we can start getting things done, my uncle said in a serious tone. Yes, forgive us, Jane, but we have to. It told us it's the only way, my aunt added as she pointed at the doll. What? What are you talking about? What do you want to do? I asked as my body started trembling in fear. You see, when that doll took our daughter that fateful January night over 17 years ago, the one it was truly after was you, but Kylie would stop at nothing to protect you, and she put herself in between you and the doll, and so, the doll seized our beloved child, holding her spirit hostage for years, to the point she lost the ability to think rationally, and is now just angry and confused, eternally seeking to fulfill a purpose she's unaware that she already accomplished. But the doll always made us know what she was willing to give us back, in exchange for the child it actually wanted. My aunt explained in tears as she picked the doll up. You can't trust that thing. Don't you see it's manipulating you? I replied, but my aunt and uncle no longer listened to reason. We could have done this years ago, but we couldn't bring ourselves to do it when you were still a child. But after all those years spent knowing that our poor daughter was suffering every single day without us being able to do anything about it, we realized there was no other choice, my uncle said as he began advancing towards me. His limp gave me time to back away, but there wasn't anything else I could do. My uncle grabbed me by the neck and immobilized me as I helplessly struggled to liberate myself. Forgive us, Jane. Forgive us, he uttered as I slowly lost consciousness. As I gradually came to my senses. I glanced at the Jane doll, which was sitting on the floor mere inches away from my face as a blurry figure materialized right next to it. Kylie. My parents watched in awe from a few feet away as I broke into tears, never having cried so hard in my entire life. It was then when something snapped in Kylie as she heard my tears. The baby! The baby! Kylie yelled as she grabbed the Jane doll with rage and began ripping it apart. She then walked towards me, gently wiping away my tears with her hands. "Baby Jane," she whispered. Our daughter is back." My aunt and uncle uttered in awe, but Kylie turned back and approached my uncle, visibly enraged. My uncle and aunt were so shocked by that reaction, they were initially going to hug her, but decided to slowly back away. "What's the matter, dear?" they asked. But Kylie responded by aggressively lunging herself at the one she caught up to first, my uncle, who tripped and fell down the stairs, hitting his head and dying instantly. My aunt, overwhelmed by the current situation, attempted to jump down the balcony to end it all, but I was able to intercept her and retain her in the bedroom until the police arrived. Kylie and I hugged each other in a long embrace that felt so intense and emotional. It was almost as if we were trying to make up for all the hugs we missed when I was growing up. "You're not a baby anymore. I like that," Kylie murmured before finally fading away. After my aunt got arrested for having assaulted me and held me hostage, the house was emptied out and sold to another family. Kylie's diary was the only thing I managed to keep for myself. "Hey, how was your day? I've heard about what happened with your aunt and uncle," Cindy asked. "Don't worry, I'm fine. I'm glad this mess has been resolved once and for all," I replied as I was trying to follow the teacher's lecture. It was then when I saw two of my classmates checking something on a computer. It was a listing for an old doll that was being sold online. It was in very bad shape and looked to have been crudely sewn back together and reassembled with stitches. The listing read, "Jane the doll. Warning. Vintage doll found at a crime scene said to have been haunted. Buy at your own risk." I'm not sure the proper way to post this or where to post it, but I'm doing this on behalf of my brother, and this seems like the best way to get his story out. He's always been kind to me and others, but he's battled something I can't explain any better than the words you'll read below. By the time he talked to me about this, it was too late to do anything. I feel helpless. I'm sure he did as well for all those years. Other than this post, I really don't know what else to do. He asked me to transcribe this exactly as he told it and let his story speak for itself. I made a promise to my brother and I intend to keep it. Word for word, this is how he dictated it. If you finish reading this and want to help, I guess the least I can ask of you is to pray. Please pray for my brother. No one deserves this. I guess the best way to start is at the beginning. Ever since I was little, I mean real little, like the toddler years, my existence on this pathetic excuse of a rock has been miserable in some form or fashion. Growing up, life felt off, an insurmountable umbrage during the day, especially bright and sunny days. I didn't really enjoy playtime like my parents said I would. Running around felt hopeless. Toys were just lifeless objects whose only purpose was to placate me for a moment. When my parents looked at me, I could see it in their eyes. They were tired, hopeless even. There was always a spark of hope that blew out the second I didn't react in some way they would come to describe as normal. They kept trying, though. In the end, it never worked. While the day had its own trials to battle, the nighttime was the worst of it. I couldn't dream, and when I did, I would awake screaming and terrified. My parents took me to doctor after doctor, and child therapists and psychologists in an attempt to garner literally any modicum of a sense as to what was wrong with me. Some prescribed sleep medications, some called it night terrors. One suggested I've had depression since I was about the age of 4. Mom and Dad found it hard to believe that was possible, but the doctors assured them it was a possibility. The amount of time and effort and strain they exerted trying to help me never ceased. All that did was make me feel guilty. Around the time I started to recognize this, the voices started. I grew up in a lower middle class family, so we didn't exactly have money to afford all the visits I would have to the aforementioned doctors. Hell, they couldn't even afford a sitter when they had to go to work. My sister, a few years older than me, used to watch me when Mom and Dad were gone, as both of them had jobs to keep us afloat. Mom and Dad would pick up graveyard shifts from time to time to get a full 8 hours during the daytime. The times when I was more manageable, the nighttime made it impossible for both to sleep. So, much like work, they took turns bearing the weight. Mom would try to comfort me as I screamed bloody murder. My dad just held my hand and cried. At least, according to my sister. I think my sister saw the most of it, and thus she tried the hardest to figure it out. She would pry a lot, which I knew she was just trying to help, but it didn't. Describing emotions and thoughts I had wouldn't remove the crushing weight I felt from them. On the contrary, it built them up. I stopped speaking about them around age 8 when the voices started. Along with feeling off each day, I would hear them. At first it was just whispers on the wind, telling me my life has no meaning, that it was pointless, as were my endeavors. No one actually loved me. Their lives would be better off without me. Despite all this, I did okay enough in school. I tried my best to excel and usually held a decent average. Not high enough to stand out, but not low enough to place me in a special class. English was my best subject and was typically the biggest discussion during parent-teacher conferences. Based on my writings, my teachers knew there was a good kid inside. They just didn't know how to break the mold, so to speak. They noticed my quiet demeanor and tried to get me to play with others and see if they could get me out of my shell. They used that phrase a lot. I tried my best to be what my parents called kind and polite to the other kids, and they were always nice to me. Their words, though, were always drowned out by the replies of the voices. Because of this, I didn't really make any friends through school. My parents shared my medical history with my teachers and the school board in hopes that someone would notice something and figure out the problem. Hell, you're reading this, so you already know nothing ever came to fruition. They couldn't pin it on anything specific, so they could do nothing. Around 10 years old, my teachers started to notice I was squinting a lot whenever I was sat at the back of class, and I often sat back there to avoid being noticed, as they put it. They mentioned to my parents I might need to see an eye doctor, and I went shortly after. Turns out I was nearsighted and was prescribed glasses. I'd be remiss to ignore it felt better with them on for those first couple hours, as I could finally see the sharpness of the world around me. I'd just always thought things were blurry the further they were, like the human eye could only see so far. For a few moments, things seemed okay. Mom and Dad said I'd actually smiled, genuinely. When the doctor tested out my vision with the glasses on, we'd stopped and got ice cream on the way home, and I remember for just a second enjoying that ice cream. For the first time, actually enjoying something. It didn't last long, though. When we got home, the temperature started to drop as a cold front was moving in. The man on the radio had said the front was bringing a thunderstorm with it, but that it would be gone by morning. The sky to the west grew darker as we made our way home. When we got out of the car and walked towards the door, I heard them on the wind. Angrier, more sadistic in nature. They spoke as if through gritted, snarling teeth, like they wanted me dead. Needless to say, I didn't sleep all that night, and neither did my sister. I had complained of pinching, itching, even scratching and scraping feelings I had while laying down trying to sleep. My sister had looked over my arms, legs, torso, and back but found nothing. I knew it was the voices, but I didn't know how. And there was no evidence that this was happening. I told my therapist about it the next day, and the following night they were worse. I logged that in my mind as another thing to not speak about. They wouldn't let me. I continued to visit the eye doctor in the coming months. It seemed the longer I wore the glasses, my peripheral vision was degrading. When the doctor moved his finger further past my line of direct sight, it would fade and disappear. Each time I went back, it would fade sooner and sooner after leaving the sight of the lenses. Around the lenses, they were just a void. The void diminished when I removed the glasses, but it was still there. Around 12 years old, I started to feel as if something was in the void, watching me, perched in the background, waiting for the night, waiting for me to remove my glasses. I was willing to try anything at this point. My sister, my mom, and my dad were all exhausted any time they looked at me. There wasn't malice in their eyes, but I could tell that I was an anchor hanging around their collective necks. So I went to bed one night with my glasses still on my head. That night I had slept through, dreamless, but a full night's sleep nonetheless. I felt better in the morning, but couldn't shake that feeling of something hiding on the edges of my line of sight. I kept on this way for the better part of that year. Shortly after my 13th birthday, my glasses broke sometime in the middle of the night. Both lenses. A shattered spiderweb of clear images. Where the cracks weren't, I could see just fine. At the cracks, though, I saw them. You can call them shadowy figures, demons, or any other verbiage that basically means dark visions. It doesn't matter. They were there, and they were furious. I don't know how I knew, but I knew I was right. On the way home from school, one outstretched its hand towards me, one finger proudly protruding forward. It reached my glasses and scraped straight down the center of the lens, digging a rough trench straight down, cracking the right lens further. I saw more of them from my right eye after that. Mom and Dad were none too pleased to find my glasses in the shape they were in. They scheduled a visit with the optometrist the next day. My dad was irate. Mom just sat in silent worry. What little sleep I got that night was plagued with nightmares. I was at the age that I could finally recall them by the next day. I was running down a road, flanked on all sides by trees and shadows. I couldn't stop. They were behind me. If I stopped, they were going to get me. I would wake up screaming the second they were on me, clutching me in an embrace that was suffocating. I woke to find my sister holding me and stroking my hair, wet drops falling on my head. That morning, I awoke, and the left lens had a similar slash across it. I refused to take them off until the doctor basically forced me that morning. He gave me some glasses of my prescription to test my vision before proceeding with his consultation. My vision was still the same according to him, but my peripheral vision was almost completely gone for some reason. He spoke to my parents on the side to figure out how exactly the glasses broke, but neither they nor my sister had an answer. The doctor thought it might have been a bully at school, but that didn't matter in the end as the glasses were still broke. My dad had asked about tougher lenses that wouldn't damage so easily, if that was the case, but the doctor said I'd already been prescribed the best lenses on the market. At this point, he recommended we try contact lenses, and after a brief discussion, my parents conceded. He showed me as well as my parents and sister how they're put in on himself, as he wore them daily. I took the sample glasses off, and immediately the shroud around my peripheral vision gained strength. The voices started in strong, and the shadows were reaching for me. In a rush, almost as if my life depended on it, I put the contacts in. My breathing shallow and frequent. The second I got the left eye's contact in, something happened. My head went quiet. I could see the world around me in such sharp resolution. My peripheral vision returned, as if my eyes had opened for the first time in years. The shadows were gone. I smiled so widely the doctor flinched back and then returned my smile. "I think we might have found a solution," he blurted out. I turned to look at my parents and saw them staring in amazement. Mom started crying. I didn't notice until I looked into their eyes, but I was also crying, smiling. It felt as if 1,000 pounds had been lifted off of my shoulders, my chest, my soul, maybe. I jumped up and hugged my mom. My dad embraced me from behind. Their warmth spread through me, and I was filled to the brim with this feeling of ecstasy. It was the happiest moment of my life. I let go, and my sister looked down at me and grabbed my shoulder and rubbed gently, tears welling up in her eyes. She could see it, could feel it. I don't know how I knew, but I knew. We got lunch on the way home at a fast food joint down the road. I hadn't realized until now, but I was starving. I ate 2 hamburgers and a large fry, and even finished off my sister's scraps. From the restaurants to home and all through the day, I could not stop talking about how great the food was, how wonderful it smelled, how much better I felt after eating. I even commented how gorgeous the day was, how great the house smelled, how beautiful trees sounded with the breeze playing at their leaves. I went quiet around dinner time, mainly because I didn't want to speak too much and annoy my family. I was quiet for about 10 minutes before Mom spoke up. "Are you okay, honey?" I couldn't help but smile. "Yeah, Mom, I feel okay. Great, even." I elated. Tears welled up in her eyes, one breaking the dam and streaming down her face to her wide-open smile. She reached out and grabbed my hand but said nothing. I don't think she could muster any words. None of them could. But I felt their happiness around me. I knew then and there that all I wanted was to see my mom smiling, to see them all happy. I don't know where the shadow people went, nor do I know where the empty, off feeling I've had since I was a child went. I only knew one thing. I could not take my contacts out. That night I dreamt. I dreamt of waterfalls and mountains, and of ocean waves tapping at my toes, and the warm, ethereal feeling the sun enveloped me in, of that warm embrace at the optometrist office. happiness encasing me entirely. The contacts the doctor had given me were supposed to last only for one day, and by the time I had woken up, my eyes were red and slightly irritated. I went to the bathroom and opened the brand new box of contacts the doctor had given as samples, as the ones we ordered wouldn't get there for a week. I stared at myself in the mirror for a long time. I don't know why, but I saw myself for the first time as I truly was. My black hair was thick, my eyes the same piercing blue of my father's. My smile and facial structure matched my mom's almost to a T. Despite how insignificant and degraded I felt day by day before that, it felt good seeing the face in the mirror this way. The feeling pervaded me to my core, and I couldn't stop smiling. I wasn't sure what was going to happen when I removed my contacts and put the new ones in. I thought back to how quickly the beings in the shadows started to invade once my glasses were off, so I could only imagine it would be similar to that. I couldn't have been more wrong. I opened the 2 new contacts and set them aside the sink so I could grab them quickly. I hesitated, looking at my reflection one last time, taking deep breaths. I reached up and removed my right contact. Their onslaught was immediate. My right eye's vision started to get swallowed in darkness, and I saw them clearly. They weren't just angry. They were pissed. Several of them reached out and started slicing at me, cutting my arm and chest and cheeks open. I couldn't see the blood, but I felt the warmth leaving my body, felt the pain and irritation at their shadowed claws. I stifled my screams and sobs as hard as I could, only a few whimpers escaping. I tried my best to fight through the pain as I reached for the new contact and put it in. I almost couldn't get it into my eye as their attacks heightened. At one point, one of the demons sliced my pinky finger off, or so I felt. I rushed and jammed the contact in my eye and closed my eye, hoping that it seated properly and wouldn't fall out. The pain all over my body stopped. I blinked a few times, the relief spilling into me. They were gone. They were only going to get stronger. It was an ironclad thought in my mind, as clear as 2 + 2. I knew the left would be just as hard. It had to be done, and I took several long, deep breaths before making my move. This time I perched the left contact on my middle finger so I could swiftly put it in without taking an extended amount of time reaching down for it. Good thing, too. The second I removed my left eye's contacts, they sliced my pinky and ring finger off of my left hand. I started to scream but suffocated it with all my might. I flipped my middle finger over my left eye and shoved it towards it before they could reach my hand again. The contact seated and I closed my eyes. I blinked, and the pain once again receded. I looked at my hands and body. No missing fingers, no cuts. The shadows were gone. I exhaled, a few tears streaming down my face onto the bathroom counter that I was clutching as if it were a cliff wall, and I would fall if I let go. The redness of my eyes retreated, but the sight irritation that was present that morning persisted. The best way I can describe it is that it felt like something was in my eye, like a piece of dust or something. My dad's allergies were horrible in the spring and fall, and he'd sometimes rub his eyes when his sinuses acted up. It was kind of like that. I wasn't sure this irritation would go away, but I knew one thing. I can't take my contacts out. Not again. Not after this. I went a week with the contacts in, and other than the inflammation I felt in my eyes that pained me in bright sunlight and windy days, I was fine. Happy, even. Being able to sleep through the night and not have the voices plaguing my every move was far worth a steady headache and soreness in my eyes. Or so I thought it was, at least. I went to the eye doctor for my follow-up visit, and needless to say, he was aggravated at what I had done. He explained to me, as well as my mom, that I would need to take the contacts out and replace them daily. He explained in detail the types of infections and bacteria that could form under the contact if I left them in for long periods of time. He spoke about the painful conditions that can form and how it can worsen. He did say it wasn't a guarantee, but that it was pertinent that I replace them. I asked him how long someone had gone with contacts in, but he refused to tell me. Somehow I think he knew if he told me a threshold before issues could arise, that I'd try to beat it. He stared at me. "Son, you have to replace these daily. No exceptions, okay?" I told him how difficult it was for me to remove them, that it was painful to do. He asked me to elaborate, but I didn't know how I could tell him, so I didn't. I knew no amount of sophisticated vocabulary would convince him, and I couldn't say anything anyways. They would hear me. He offered to remove them himself, but I declined. I promised him I would replace them as soon as I got home. He protested, citing that he needed to inspect my eyes and take a sample of the inside of the contact to ensure no bacteria had formed nor would form. I assured him I'd be okay, that I didn't feel anything like what he had described earlier. I promised my mom I would change them and she could hear the resolve in my voice. "Doctor, I believe my son. He'll change them out." The doctor threw his hands up in capitulation, reached under his desk, and grabbed a bottle of gel tears and handed them to me. He told me to use them to help with the redness once I removed my contacts. We picked up the box of new contacts from his assistant and left. When I got home, I went to the bathroom with the new contacts and stared at the 2 new contact packets that sat on the counter. I would have to be quicker this time. I put the new contact on my middle finger again and positioned it next to my forefinger, in hopes I could place the new one on at the same time I removed the old one. I reached with my right thumb and index finger and grasped the old contact. As I squeezed it to remove its suction to my eye, I could tell they were surrounding me. As I pulled it away from my eye, I felt something grab my wrist and hold it in place. I strained against the force, trying to push my middle finger towards enough to touch the contact to my eye. Maybe my eyelid could have grabbed it at the edges and pushed it into my eye. It was worth a shot. I barely moved my middle finger when the shadow figure that was holding my wrist grabbed my hand to stop all motion. Anger filled me, a fire that raged inside my chest, along with the pain of the demon now starting to claw at my back, ripping chasms into my skin. I yelled furiously, almost cried when I jerked my head forward towards my finger. The contact seated immediately, and the grasp on my wrist was gone as fast as it had appeared. They were getting smarter, and I knew I wouldn't be able to do this twice. The left contact I decided to try to Hail Mary. I put the new contact on my left index finger and brought it up to my eye. I looked to the left as hard as I could and placed the contact on a bare part of my eye. It settled onto the side of my eye, and when I looked forward, I felt it slide into my eye socket. Instantly, pain shot into my head, but I worked as fast as I could to remove the old contact. It peeled off my eye, a sticky substance trying to hold it in place, almost as if it had glue on it to keep it there. The pain seared, but I held the contact tight. When I pulled it out, I threw it into the sink in defiance and spat at it. The headache that had started was now building into a migraine, and it hurt to have the lights on. I shut them off and grabbed the bottle of gel tears the doctor had given me and squeezed 2 drops into both eyes. The pain subsided some, but my left eye still hurt a bit. I left the bathroom and my sister was standing at the door, staring at me with concern. "Are you okay, Tommy?" she asked, a reserved look on her face. "Yeah, left eye just hurts a bit," I replied. "I think I'm gonna lie down for a bit." She muttered okay and watched me as I walked down the hall into my room. I grabbed a bottle of over-the-counter migraine pills on my bedside table and took 2. I laid in bed and closed my eyes. Sleep didn't come, and my thoughts circled me. I could feel the edge of my mind, the off feeling starting again. I thought about other possible ways to replace my contacts, but none came. I knew if I tried the Hail Mary tactic again, they wouldn't just stop me. They would try to kill me. I don't know how, but it once again felt concrete in my mind. I don't know if the beings or demons or whatever the hell they were could kill me. Hell, maybe death would be welcome at this point. At some point, I drifted to sleep. When I awoke, I felt tired and exhausted, drained of energy. My left eye still hurt, but the migraine had died down to a manageable level. I walked to the bathroom and looked at my eyes. They were bloodshot red, with the left visibly worse off than my right. I stared at myself. I debated my future, my life, the existence we purvey to each other, that it's all worth it in the end. What about this was worth it? I debated taking the contacts out and letting the beasts that hid in the shadows rip me apart. The voice of doubt in my mind spoke up. What if they have no intention of killing you? The years that had passed came to mind, and I knew I couldn't survive any longer than I already had. It was too much. Even if the painful attack stopped, the overwhelming weight of nothingness that swallowed me before the contacts would reach a point of unbearable, and I knew I'd have to off myself to make it end. Does hell exist? If I ended my life, would the demons finally have me for eternity? I shook the thoughts off. The future was uncertain, and the now only mattered. And all I knew was now that I'd never be able to take my contacts out. Months had passed by, and the condition of my left eye continued to degrade, with my right eye following suit. The gel tears had ceased to improve the burning, itching feeling I had every day I kept the contacts in. Each day I awoke, there was a thick, crusted substance built up on the edges of my eyelids. For the last few weeks I had washed my eyes and scrubbed my eyelids with warm water and a washcloth, doing my best to hide the condition of my eyes. This morning, though, my mom had woken me up and took one look at me and called the doctor immediately, and then called school to say I would be out for an unforeseen amount of time. When I walked into the doctor's office, he let out a frustrated and defeated sigh from his first look at me. He examined my eyes thoroughly. The bright, shining lights on the machine he had to use reinforced the steady headache that lumbered around in my eye sockets and frontal lobe. Aside from the pain in my eyes, I could feel blood loss from my right hand where my mother gripped it, holding on as if her life depended on it. The doctor took several samples of the fluid around my eye to confirm what he already knew. After leaving the office for what felt like an eternity, he returned with a piece of paper in his hands and a look in his eyes that confirmed I was screwed. My mom stared at the doctor, and I could feel all strength and resolve leave her body. "Please tell me it's treatable." Her voice sounded miles away. "I'm past sugarcoating anything, ma'am, and you need to hear this straight." He started, looking down at the paper and back up at her. "The contacts in your son's eyes have now begun forming into his eyes. They have almost entirely replaced his cornea, and underneath them blood vessels have started forming into what's left of his cornea. There's a bacteria forming here as well, probably exacerbated by the gel tears. In short, we cannot take the contacts out now." "What are you saying?" she said, exasperated and beginning to cry. "Surgery is the only thing we can consider now, and I'm recommending it immediately if we're to attempt to save your son's vision at all. If the surgery is successful, and that's a big if, he will have diminished sight in his right eye and lose sight in his left eye. If we're unsuccessful, and his eyes are too damaged, we'll have to remove both his eyes permanently." My mom broke into sobs and a sharp pain shot through my chest. I couldn't watch her, and I looked back at the doctor. His glare said everything I already knew. That I had done this to myself and caused this pain. That I had once again become a burden to my family. I felt horrible, belittled, small. The only solution I thought would fix everything ended up sowing my fate. I asked my sister to transcribe this, and she's sitting next to me as I lay on this hospital bed pre-operation. Mom and Dad went to get some food and to talk, they said, and they've been gone for quite some time. It feels pointless to try and put words to what has happened to me the past few years, but it needed to be said. My family has never been spiritual, nor have they prescribed to any theology. We never really talked about a higher power or being that created all of this, so I'm not sure if anyone is listening beyond this plane of existence. But please, just please, please someone. I know I don't believe in a God, but surely there's someone out there. There has to be, right? Maybe some deity that is unlike anything described in the multitude of religious texts out there. Something or someone truly powerful. Anything. Whatever or whoever is running this abhorrent show, can you please help? Please? Take my eyes for all I care, and take this curse or hex or demonic possession or whatever it is away from me, please. That's when he stopped speaking and asked me to let him rest a little before the operation, and I reluctantly agreed. He was in surgery for hours when the head surgeon finally walked down the hallway to us. As he was walking towards us, his gaze dropped to the floor for a moment and my heart sank. He reached us and told us there were several complications. The first being that the attempts to save my brother's eyes were unsuccessful, and that they had to remove them entirely. My mom's face twisted into a horrified, agonized shape as my dad clutched her with one arm. The other rested on my shoulder in a grip that was hard enough to bruise my skin. The surgeon continued to deliver the bad news, stating that my brother had reacted negatively to the anesthetic they administered. He threw out a few medical terms I'm now Googling next to this document to understand what happened, but the gist of it is, my brother succumbed to something called locked-in syndrome. Nurses and doctors frequently come in to test his reflexes and check on his vitals, but say little and provide no warmth or comfort. They know the score, and I feel as if I do now as well. His pulse and blood pressure spikes occasionally, but he shows no signs of communicating with us. Dad is asleep in the chair next to his bed, and Mom left to get some cigarettes a while ago. She hasn't smoked since my brother was conceived, but I'm not about to tell her not to. They're both distraught, and neither of them fully understand what my brother went through. I have no intentions of telling them this story, because what good would it do? It'd only compile the hurt they have into a whirlwind of depression and helplessness. Please pray for my brother. I don't know if he's still fighting these shadow people as he described them or not, but please, pray that he finds peace. All I can do is say thank you for reading this. And thank you for the prayers if you've given any. Susan. I've never been good at making friends, or any type of bond with people in general. I'm not even close to most of my family members like I'm close to Jessie. Jessie is my best friend. I've known her only for a year and a half, but she's literally my world. She's the only person I can speak to. The only person who understands me. I've never slept over at anyone's house that isn't mine. And even when I'm supposed to be staying at a family member's house, I get anxious and they have to call my parents to collect me. This results in my parents having to cancel everything they planned. My parents resent me. I'm a huge burden to them because of how anxious I am. Jessie asked if I wanted to have a sleepover at her house. I'd never been to her house, or anyone for that matter, and I'll admit I was ecstatic, but also hesitant. In case I got anxious and ruined the sleepover and my friendship. I knew I was probably overthinking, but it still scared me. Jessie gave me some time to think, and I agreed. I told my parents, and they were pretty shocked, but decided to let me go because I had an actual shot at making a best friend for life. The car pulled up onto a large driveway, connected to an even larger house. It was huge, like mansion-sized. Probably the biggest house I'd ever laid eyes on. Me and my parents made our way over to the front door, which was about twice my dad's size, and he was 6'7". There was no doorbell. Instead, there was an abnormally large silver knocker in the middle of the door. I knocked. Jessie answered the door. When she saw me, her face seemed to light up, and her smile grew larger. She instantly leaned in for a hug. Jessie's mother and father also approached the door and stood behind Jessie, also with a comforting smile on their face. Jessie's father was also tall like my dad. He was your typical dad-looking person. It was the same with her mother, too. It was almost surreal. Jessie toured me around her huge house, which took about an hour in itself. Then we ventured off into Jessie's bedroom, which was huge and pink. Very pink. Like every object was pink. After staying in Jessie's room playing games and eating candy for a while, her mother walked into the room and placed a sheet of A4 paper on Jessie's bed. The way she walked was so elegant and graceful, like a ballerina. I took off my headphones and grabbed the sheet of paper. It read, "Sleepover rules. Follow these rules to ensure you have a safe and happy sleepover. 1. Don't eat too much candy. They can smell it from miles away. 2. Do not leave the bedroom after 1:45 a.m. Please remember this rule. Your life depends on it. 3. If you happen to wake up during the night for no apparent reason, hide under the bed within 25 seconds. That way they cannot see you. 4. Do not get snacks from the mini fridge during 8:56 p.m. and 9:47 p.m. You will not like what you find. 5. Make sure to turn off any light source apart from the TV. You must keep this on all through the night. I can't emphasize how important this is. 6. If you wake up randomly and see Jessie sitting upright, awake in her bed, run. Lock yourself in the ensuite, and do not come out for the rest of the night. If Jessie knocks and says she hurt herself and needs help, ignore her and do not reply. 7. If you wake up and hear the baby crying, ignore it completely. Don't even move. It isn't the baby. 8. Do not attempt to speak to Jessie during the night, and if she speaks to you, do not reply. This is crucial if you want to stay safe. 9. If you hear a dog whimpering and scratching on the bedroom door, drag Jessie under the bed and then hide behind the bookshelf. We do not own a dog. 10. If you hear a ringing in your ear, run. Leave the house. This is the only exception. If you don't, we all die. Have a safe sleepover, Tina. It had to be some kind of joke. These couldn't have been real, but I still have a gut feeling that I should follow these creepy rules. I folded the piece of paper and placed it on my right pocket, then sat down again to play with Jessie. After about an hour, Jessie's dad opened the door. "It's bedtime, girls. You must go to sleep now." I suddenly got very anxious, because this is when I had to start following the creepy rules. I held back all of my emotion because I didn't want to lose a friend like Jessie. Me and Jessie both got into bed. We top and tailed so my head was at the bottom end of her bed. "Night, Tina. Sweet dreams," she said in between yawns. I don't know how my dreams were going to be sweet after what I'd read. Surprisingly, I fell asleep pretty quick. My sleep was pretty deep and I didn't have any nightmares like most nights. And that's when I woke up. My stomach sank. I turned to see Jessie sitting upright in her bed, wide awake. I didn't want to believe that these rules were true, but my instinct was to just run. I bolted into the ensuite and locked the door behind me. After a few solid minutes of hyperventilating in Jessie's ensuite, I decided to unlock the door. I thought it was all probably stupid anyway. Just before my hand reached the lock, someone knocked on the door. I froze. "Tina, help me. I've hurt my head and my vision's going blurry." I desperately wanted to open the door, but something in my head advised me against it. Jessie kept screaming for help. I slumped into the corner, shaking with every breath I took. She was screaming for hours. It was unbearable. Her voice got less human-like and more distorted with every screech. By the time she stopped, I was already half asleep. To put it into perspective just how long her screaming went on for, I woke up. The light from the sun outside made my eyes sting. My ears were still throbbing. I slowly got up from the corner of the bathroom and unlocked the door. Jessie was playing on her PS5. Everything was totally normal. "Hey, Tina," she said in her usual jaunty tone. "I think your mom and dad are already outside waiting for you in their car." I couldn't take speaking. Everywhere in my body ached. I picked up my stuff and started walking downstairs. Jessie's parents waited at the bottom of the stairs to greet me. "Your parents are outside waiting for you, Tina," said her mother with a smile. How did they get here so quickly? It was only 8:45. I could see the open door and my parents' car outside. I was so relieved. I was gonna leave this place finally. Jessie's dad showed me out and I hopped into my parents' car. I can't begin to explain how relieved I was to see my parents' smiling faces again. Jessie and her family waved at me as I drove away. "How was the sleepover, sweetie?" asked my dad. I was about to reply when I got a notification on my phone. It was a message from my mom. It said, "Hey Tina, I was just messaging to ask what time you wanted me and your dad to pick you up from Jessie's house." I looked back up at my mom, who was driving, and then my dad, who was smiling eerily at me. I forgot to leave on the TV. I felt sick to my stomach. "Forgot something?" asked my dad. Train drivers of Reddit. I'm looking for some advice on operating procedures. I've driven into a tunnel on my standard route, but after a few minutes, all lights and signaling went out on the track. Due to risk of collision, I've stopped the train and tried radioing control, but nobody is answering. Any help is appreciated. Edit 1. We've been stopped for 20 minutes now, and passengers are becoming impatient. One has even pressed the passenger alarm. I don't have a guard on board. I'm the only staff. I have some phone signal, but nobody is answering personal numbers. The situation is becoming pretty urgent here, so if anybody has any advice, I'm very open to it. Tunnel is completely dark aside from my headlights. Track ahead is clear. Edit 2. I've started to move the train at 5 miles per hour. as we've been stationary for 45 minutes and I'm concerned that the passengers are becoming uncomfortable or unwell. I am sure that this is a safe speed, and I will be able to stop if there is any obstruction on the track. Have any other rail staff ever had anything like this happen to them? I'm concerned about what could be happening on the network. I've never been unable to contact the team before. Someone please let me know if there has been some kind of incident. News pages don't seem to be loading for me at the moment. I am continuing with caution. Edit 3. New request. Somehow we've managed to get lost within the tunnel. At some point, I'm not sure when, the track we are following transitioned. I must have missed a changeover, though I don't know how that's possible with the speed and the attention I'm paying. I was focused ahead, making sure that there was no obstructions, and suddenly I realized the environment had changed. The walls of the tunnel have become rough, looking unfinished. The overhead electrical wires and lights have completely gone, and even the walls are free of graffiti. It's all unfinished stone, looking more like a mine shaft than anything designed for a train. I don't know what to do. All I can guess is that somehow I've taken us down a disused track, maybe very old or very new, and I'm at risk of derailing us if the condition degrades. Oddly, the rails are in good condition down here, and roll out as far as my headlights can pick out, but I don't know how long that will continue. It's believed it's too dangerous to continue, and I'm going to have to turn us around. I suppose my new question is what my liability is here. Passenger safety is the most important thing, and I'm doing everything I can, even though I've messed up. Something is not right with all of this. Again, I'm appealing for any help that can be offered. Final note is that the air is cold down here, much colder than the other tracks. The day has been mild so far, but nothing like this. I opened the window briefly, and I could swear my breath was fogging. I'm going to stop the train and drive us back out the way I came. Hopefully I can raise someone on the radio in that time. Edit 4. The situation has developed, and I'm looking for any advice on how to get my passengers to safety. As many of you know, I have to walk through the train and access the second cockpit at the other end to change direction. I sent a PA message first informing the passengers that we were stopping due to unforeseen complications, would be reversing, and that we would reach the next stop as soon as possible. I then let the driver carriage and entered the train proper. Unsurprisingly, the passengers were very agitated, and I had to spend longer than I liked trying to field questions and concerns from scared and angry people, with a number of them bringing up threats of lawsuits or similar. Luckily, I was able to push through the majority of the carriages, stepping through the separating doors without too much issue. A point I should note here is that the carriages are not conjoined. The doors lead outside, and I have to step across the gap to enter the next car, making sure to lock the doors behind me. This means that I spent time outside the train, and I can confirm the air is icy and thin. Any thoughts of exploring the tunnel on foot are gone. I want to be out of here as soon as possible. The only other area of concern were the cars in the middle of the train. The people inside were frightened and jumped violently as I entered. They said that they had heard sound from outside the train, scraping in the tunnel, and even something banging against the walls of the carriage. Although I did my best to placate them and took a brief look around as I moved on, I couldn't find anything that would cause sounds like that. No loose wires or stones, no signs of animals. I'm sure it's nothing, but it is still a good reason to get moving quickly. I have taken my seat in the second cockpit and have begun driving back the way we came. It is disturbingly similar to the view I had driving into this awful tunnel, but I suppose hewn rock looks like hewn rock. I will update when I can. Edit 5. I have lost control. This forum is now for me to document that I took the best decisions I could under the circumstances. I am doing all I can to keep this train and the people inside it safe. We have been backtracking for longer than we were originally moving down this forsaken tunnel, and there have been no track switches, no changes, no way back to the correct route. All I can see is the cone of light in front of me as the train moves. It's colder too. Cold enough that there is condensation on the windows, that I can feel it seeping through the walls of my cabin, and we're descending. I am now also certain we are traveling downhill. There is a pull, gentle but very real, towards the windscreen, and I don't know where it's taking us. All I know is that I'm traveling at a safe speed to stop if I need to, but fast enough to get us away, because now I hear things too. I thought I had driven over something at first, but then I heard more. Thumps along the side, like we were hitting branches. But there was nothing ahead of us we could be hitting. Then it was the roof. A thud, followed by scraping. Something moving along over my head. I tracked it. Whatever it was, sliding backwards towards the length of the train before disappearing. There were moments of silence after, then the screech of the passenger alarm made me jump out of my skin. It came again and again. Someone hammering the button. There's something outside. Something on the train. Came a panicked woman's voice before being immediately cut off by another alarm and a man's shout. We're in number 3. Something is banging on the roof. What the hell is happening? You've got to stop this. The alarm went again and again, each time a new terrified voice being cut off by the next. There's something on. Help us, what are you doing? Between the doors, at the front of... Looking at me. You've got to do something, the windows. Police, now. Call the police right now. Unlock the door. I can still hear them, even without the comms. The screams are coming from the carriage behind me, with the crashes and bangs still going. I've turned off the alarm though, turned off the radio. I have to concentrate. I have to get us out of here. What am I meant to do here? What am I meant to say to those poor people? I can't help them. All I can do is drive this cursed train and pray that we see sunlight again. 6. Christ help me. They're people. There's people on the tracks. I thought it was a mannequin when I saw the first, pale and still, arms by its side, staring as we went past. It turned its head though, turned its head and watched us go past. Then there was more, dozens of them, hundreds. They lined the track, only inches between them and the train that rushed past, not even a flinch from them. Completely emotionless. Are they what is making that noise? Could they be climbing on the train? They are nothing like the squatters that we get. These things are unnatural. I no longer care about procedure, about safety. All I care about is getting this train somewhere else. If this is a mine shaft, a new track, even if it's hell itself, I don't care. I've maxed out the speed. Now I'm just watching those creatures and the track blur past. This has to end somewhere. The sounds from behind me seem to have stopped. I don't know if that's good or bad. I dare not ask on the radio. I'll update again if I can. Update 7. Apologies for the delay. Thank you to everyone that reached out by message asking after me. I apologize for the delay in getting back to you all. I am safe, and as of yesterday I quit my job as a driver. I don't think I will ever set foot near a railway again. About an hour after my last post, there was suddenly a burst of sunlight. We came hurtling out of the tunnel, far faster than the legal limit, and I had to immediately slam on the emergency brake. Normally when you hit the brakes like that, you hear shouts from the passengers, but the cars behind me were dead silent. Slowly I began moving again, heading towards the nearest station, barely able to see in the harsh daylight after so long underground. My boss wanted to fire me. It's not like I can blame him. I was AWOL for 2 hours and reappeared with a dented train pulling the wrong way into a station on the wrong track. By all rights, I could have been arrested. The union had my back, though, talked her down to an immediate resignation if I didn't press charges for the faulty signaling. I expected hell when I opened the train doors at the station. As the train stopped, I felt light and shaky, trying to process what had just happened in the normality of a railway stop. In the moment, I tried to say something on the radio, to apologize or announce the situation, but my mouth was dry and my hands were trembling too badly, so instead I just opened the doors, opened my own, stepped out onto the platform and braced myself for the hell of shouting and screaming and threats that would come my way. But there were none. Instead, they just filed out, silent and pale, and stood there on the concrete staring at me. I'll never forget that as long as I live. How they watched me, hundreds of them, blank-faced, as I just turned and ran. I took in the morning. The fog so thoroughly obscured the landscape that I felt like I was in a new world. When you have lived somewhere for some time, you become accommodated to your environment. I had stopped seeing with the eyes of a newcomer. It was only on days of extreme weather that I could still feel the wonder. More than anything else, the trees took on an awesome dimension. Usually, trees seem to reach into the open sky, but this morning, in the thick fog, the trees appeared to be hanging in the air and reaching down to me. I wasn't the only one impressed by the shift in the atmosphere, but Freddie didn't seem to like it so much. She needs at least 2 walks a day. Even when the weather is unpleasant or extreme, she becomes restless otherwise. The barking can actually be painful. She protested a lot when I put her harness on, but she is a very good dog. She trusts me. Together we exited my front garden and stepped into the fog. Opposite my house there is a large, open field. It extends out into endless miles of countryside. Most farmers allow you on their land, provided you stick to the designated footpaths. If there is no path, they usually let you walk around the edges. The first field has a public footpath right through the middle. Often we find there are livestock, cows or sheep in this field, so we usually stick to the path. At the end of the track, there are 3 stiles. The one to the right takes us to our favorite field. There are gates on all sides and no animals. This means I can let Fred off her lead, and she can run around freely. She likes to have a good run in the morning. When we stepped out into the first field, we could see maybe 25 meters all around us. Anything beyond that receded into obscurity. This made me a little nervous because I couldn't tell if the cows were in the field or not. Freddie and I had a little incident a few weeks back with the cows. One of them seemed to think we were there to feed them. Mostly I like cows. They are naturally inquisitive and have sweet eyes. This cow in particular was very intrigued by us and pursued us relentlessly. Something about this seemed to spook the other cows, and more appeared. I felt uncomfortable, but I continued to walk with Fred happily bouncing away next to me. The next time I turned my head to look, I saw my 2 very genuine horror. All the cows in the field running downhill, charging at me and Fred. For those of you that don't live in the countryside, you should know. There are many deaths by trampling each year, often dog walkers. The thing you must do is let your dog run. They will be fine. They are much faster and nimbler than cows. It is you, the human, who is in danger. Fred and I were fortunate. We had been heading downhill, and cows struggle to maintain such high speeds on gradients like that one. Their knees are not built for it at all. With this knowledge, I knew I had time to run to the bottom of the field and make it back to the entrance. Bless Fred. I don't think she had a clue. She was just happy to run. Not being able to see the cows in today's fog put me slightly on edge, but we made it to the stiles without an incident. At this end of the field, we could scarcely see 10 meters ahead. I wondered why Fred was so bothered by the fog. Dogs seem to use their noses and ears more than their eyes anyway. Crossing over into our favorite field, I let her off the lead. She seemed hesitant to leave my side. I sat down next to her. The grass was wet. I wanted to let her know it was all right. We sat there together for a while. When she was young, I taught her to give paw. To this day, when she needs my attention or is trying to make some kind of communication with me, she offers me her paw. She gave me her paw to hold in that field and leant her head in the resting spot between my elbow and forearm. I knew she was feeling uneasy, but I needed her to get a good run in before we went back home. It wouldn't do to have her barking all day as she can. Sometimes she doesn't know what's best for her. I picked up a stick and coaxed her into playing a game of fetch with me. Gradually, I threw the stick further and further. Fred seemed less tense once I got her adrenaline going. She brought me back the stick, and this time I really threw that thing. She shot off, bouncing from left to right in that funny way she does, bouncing until she too was engulfed by the fog. I couldn't see her, but I could hear her running around and panting a lot. I thought maybe she couldn't find the stick. She did seem to be getting agitated by something. I could hear her running in strange directions all around me. I called out to her. She was nowhere near where I had thrown the stick. I called out to her again. Her bark was very distant. She had gone too far, and soon would be lost in the fog. I had been stupid. I got her all worked up. She had run off, and now we were apart from each other. She couldn't see me. She probably couldn't hear me either. The fog was dampening the sounds. Why did I encourage her to go run around like that? That was really, really stupid. And now I would have to wander around this murky landscape looking for her. It could take quite some time. I heard her again. She didn't bark this time. It wasn't a sound she made often at all. It was a clipped yelp, a pained cry. Had something bad happened? It was far away, somewhere in the first field maybe. I called out to Fred, told her I was coming, and I ran. The fog was almost the only thing I could see, but I knew these fields very well. I thought she must have hurt herself somehow, and that I needed to find her. My hands found the top of the stile, and I quickly clambered over. I almost slipped over a little, but caught myself in time. Panic was not going to help. I tried to steady my mind as well. She had left the other field. She had somehow come into this one. I had heard her over there. What now? I called again. No response. Freddie was fine. She was fine. I kept walking in the direction that I thought she was. It was swampy off the path. There had been large rainfall recently. The cows had churned the field into mud. My feet were being sucked down, and it was getting harder to pull them out without the mud taking my shoes also. I was looking around, trying to spot some dry ground when I saw the first one, a rotting cow. Flesh and bones somehow inverted. The rib cage sat on top of the sinew, protecting it like an exoskeleton. The unprotected stomach, however, was being picked apart by crows. It was spilling out and mixing with the swampy water in the mud. In between the birds, I glimpsed the inside of the cow, filled with writhing and convolving larvae. I did not stop to have a good think about what was going on. I did not go up for a closer inspection. No. I ran. I bolted. I left with such force I pulled my left foot right out of its shoe, leaving it behind, stuck in the mud. As I ran through the field, I saw briefly 3 more cows in a similar state. I took generous detours around them, and they disappeared into the gray void. I was lost. I had run in many strange directions since I saw the first cow. Fortunately, I had found solid ground to stand on. A moment to get my bearings. I turned to my right. There was nothing I could see that indicated where I was. I turned to my left and let out my own cry. There, Looming toward me was a bull. His eyes were open and misty. Patches of his side had worn away, revealing the tender muscle structure of his head. Some of the sinew and muscle seemed to have fallen off. In these cavities, the white bone of his skull. His body had also undergone the disgusting inversion I had seen on the other dead cows. His guts and organs were swinging under his belly, and with every step he took, another little piece of viscera fell off into the mud. He was very alive. He lowered his head, maintaining eye contact as if he was going to charge. In that split second, I ran through my options in my mind. If this were an ordinary bull showing aggression, I would not have the advantage. The ground here was flat. Whatever running speed I could reach, an ordinary bull would likely double, and in half the time. I suspected, however, that this twisted bull was a little incapacitated. I could try to run, but I didn't know where the nearest stile was, and the ground was marshy in places, another advantage to the bull. I decided my best option was to make myself very large, to shout and scream in a way that might intimidate the creature. I put my arms up outstretched and made harsh, loud noises I hadn't known I was capable of making. The bull was unperturbed. It kicked a leg back in preparation for its charge. Perhaps I should have run in the first place, but I ran now, as fast as I could, trying to sidestep the monstrosity. I figured if I had to turn again to start its charge in another direction, then that would buy me some seconds. Another mistake. The bull simply turned, jerking its head and body at me. A glancing blow, but it knocked me to the ground. I tried to drag myself away and made it onto the soft, marshy ground, but it brought one of its front legs down on my right elbow, splattering me with muddy water and dirt, shooting sharp pain up and down my arm. I screamed. I could hardly see. The pain was blinding and there was mud in my eyes, but I could make out well enough what was about to happen. The bull was rearing, ready to strike a final blow. I closed my eyes. What happened next I can only make sense of now. At the time I heard a terrible snarling, the sound of tearing flesh, and then I felt the full weight of the bull on my body and lost consciousness. I knew that some time had passed. For a while, I wasn't sure if I was alive at all. Then I heard a steady breathing. I thought perhaps I was on the verge of death. Only I seemed to be getting more lucid, my thoughts less abstract. After a while, I even managed to separate what was me from what was external. The breathing was not my own. It was warm. It was over my head. It was... Fred? I opened my eyes. She was over me, keeping watch, one paw on my head. I managed to say her name hoarsely and she looked down. She licked me. Her tongue was soft. She had blood on her face. I wanted to get up, to check if she was okay, but there was a weight on my body stopping me from moving. I bent my neck. There was the upper half of the bull, lying across my torso and legs. It was very dead. Its throat had been ripped out, creating a cavernous space in its neck. The bull's eyes were open, unmoving. I wanted to be sick. Fred seemed pretty relaxed given the circumstances. She had a considerable amount of blood on her. Me too. I asked her if she was okay and she just pawed at me again. She was a good girl. I tried to slide out from under the bull. I couldn't put pressure on my right arm, so I pulled myself out with my left. I was in a bad way. Messed up arm, missing shoe, covered in blood. The fog was receding, but I couldn't see the path. It hardly mattered anyway. Fred walked just in front of me. She knew the way home. The mist is still thick this evening. We have locked all the doors and windows. Fred has been given a double portion of her dinner, but unfortunately for her, I don't think we will go out for a walk tomorrow. For purposes of covering my identity, you can refer to me as Tom. I'm the son of one of the hundreds of scientists scouring the universe for signs of life, though he did it through a lesser-known medium, a blacklisted group which has had its reputation tarnished at the hands of the international community. They are on watch lists in over 50 countries, and their activities are monitored 24/7. I already know what you're thinking. That means they're collective families as well. You are correct, but I can't take it anymore. The truth must be known. Anyone who knows anything about space knows that among the countless stars, there exist violent regions. Black holes. We are all taught that these points are masses which enact a gravity so strong not even light can escape. This is true and has been allowed to be shared with the public for decades, but there is a truth to it which has been hidden away. I only just learned of this over a month ago, and all eyes are on me now. They already have my family in custody and are trying to track me down to my undisclosed location. I doubt I will have a week once this goes public. The truth is, black holes aren't just infinitely small points with infinite gravity. They are gateways to an alternate side of reality. You could call it the ethereal verse. Once on that side, there is no going back. Yet. More on that in a minute. The ethereal verse transforms matter, regardless of if organic or not, into a special energy which we can neither see nor detect. This is what scientists have called dark energy. It's not literally dark, but rather just invisible to those of us not within their circle. The governments of the world have been in collusion with each other to develop a way to pass through these gateways freely. Technology has become much more advanced than people may think. They have hidden facilities all over the globe in places you wouldn't think to look. Cloaking technology is real, and is just like you'd see in the movies. Ever wonder why people blather on about objects seen moving faster than possible in conventional or militarized aircraft? There you go. It goes deeper than that, though. But I can't sidetrack anymore. There's no time. Back to the ethereal verse. So, anything that goes through becomes dark energy, which means it cannot be seen or detected or touched by us. Why does that matter? Well, true, we cannot do any of those things. That energy does have an invisible effect on us, our minds. They can be tampered with and manipulated in ways traditional science has not managed. Memories, emotions, thoughts. It's mind control beyond limitation. They've managed to tap into that and are running experiments even as we speak. But this is not the full extent of the revelation. I mentioned at the beginning that my father was one of the hundreds of scientists looking for life in the stars. We have. The ethereal verse is where they lie. We don't know what they look like, but they know what we look like. They found us 77 years ago, and if you do the math, you'll know exactly why. The Manhattan Project was the point of no return. We attacked them, and they've sown their influence into those in power. It won't be long before our reckoning comes. My father discovered this, and a little over a month ago, he met his end with a bullet. I don't know why I myself have not been taken over, but I can feel the influence. It takes time to corrode a mind into total submission to their call, but once it's done, that's game over. Forget the person you once knew. They are monstrous puppets manipulated by invisible strings which can't be cut. They toy with us and seek our destruction. They can't directly kill us, so they have us do it ourselves. Proliferation of nuclear warheads, pollution, war. Even certain counties are the public face of their control. Why am I telling you all of this? Because there is a way out of this, and one to stop it? No, I'm afraid there's not. Once they got control of the leaders, there was no chance anymore. Their facilities are so defended and secure that it would make Fort Knox look like a padlock. There is nothing to be done. Try to ignore your intrusive thoughts and live what life you can while you're able to. Pray you're not around when they've figured out how to make the gateways accessible from both sides and these beings manage to take physical form. The blacklisted group made analysis that they are moon-sized and likely have a cellular makeup that absorbs nuclear and reactive energy. They will swallow the sun and stars until there is nothing left. When I last saw my father, he had told me it wouldn't be long before they took over his mind. He told me what they spoke to him in his thoughts. We see you always. The look on his face told me all I need to know. Even death will not remove their gaze from you. And before he left, he closed the door with parting words. Eye contact is the end.